Hello and welcome to my video where I answer one of the most frequently asked questions that I am asked by my pupils when they're given a new piece for the first time, or when I've set them a challenge for a week and I come back and I ask, how did you get on? And they go, I didn't know where to put my hands, so I didn't do anything. Which is an interesting question, and we're going to look at how we can answer it. So just to quickly talk about what I'm showing here. So first of all, we have Dorico. We have this particular document here made in a program called Dorico, and I'll be making a PDF of this, which will be available to download once this video is done. And I also have, for the first time, a camera on my hands. So I'm hoping and I am hopeful that that will be of some help. I have put a blue dot on middle C. So for anyone who doesn't know, middle C, the first note that we learn, two black notes, and it's to the left of them. So it's not to the right of them, it's not in the middle of them, it's to the left of them, roughly in the middle of the piano. This is called middle C. Okay, and it should sound like this on your piano, and you should be able to hear what this sounds like. Anyway, so without further ado, where do I put my hands at the start of a piece? We have ourselves three questions that we have to ask. 1, which hand? 2, which note? And 3, which finger? So once we have worked these things out, we can work out which hand we're going to use, which note we're going to start on, and which finger we're going to use to actually play that note. And from there, the piece, especially at the early levels, should be a little easier. So we're going to begin with which hand do we use? And the most important thing for us to be aware of is that it's all down to these symbols at the front. So when we have notes which are written down for us on our lovely sheet music, they belong to a stave or a staff, a set of 5 lines like these are. This being one stave and this being one stave here. And at the beginning of the stave, we have ourselves a symbol. And if it's a complicated symbol, which is a big squiggle and all these kind of ups and downs and stuff like that, that is called a treble clef, and that is using our right hand. So the complicated symbol is for our right hand. Treble is the high notes. So if you're sat at your piano and you take your right hand and you go slam and you hit random notes at the top of our piano, they're going to be quite high. They're going to be quite high pitched notes. Meanwhile, if we sit at a piano and take our left hand and we just go, they're going to be quite low, and that's using our left hand. And the left hand, the symbol for that is a little more simple. It's just kind of, and that symbol there is going to be for the left hand. It's just going to be all those kind of lower, bassy kind of notes, and thus is called bass clef. Okay, so even before we know which notes we're going to play, we need to be aware that these notes here belong to the treble clef, and these notes here will belong to the bass clef. So it begins with the right hand and the left hand, which is there. Okay, and at the basic level, that is all we have to identify: treble clef and bass clef. Let us move on. Our second question: which note? Now, this splits into right hand and left hand. So to begin with, we're just going to be talking about our right hand, though there are rules which are moved between, which are the same for both the left and the right hand, which we will cover shortly. So the first question we ask ourselves is the note we can see on a line or a space? Now, this is a really interesting and very important question we have to answer. And we have to identify whether or not a note is on a line or a space. If I move away from this briefly, I'm just going to go to the bottom here, just with a few blank staves. I'm going to play a few notes with my right hand. E, F, G, A. Okay, so what do we notice there? I've started with my thumb, 2 notes above middle C, so we've got C, D, E, because if we think of our alphabet, we've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G. What I've done there is to use my thumb to play an E, which is this note here. We then move to this note, which is the next note up. We then move to this note. We then move to this one. And if we notice here, these are going in, so next door neighbors, and they're going from a line to a space to a line to a space. And what this means is that if the blob, or the note head, which I'll be calling it, the note head is on a line, then we're going to call it a line. And if it is between two lines, we're going to refer to it as a space. So this one, it's got a line going through it, so it's a line. And this one, it's between two lines, so it's a space. Why do we care? Because if we know one note, and if it is on a line or a space, then all notes from there alternate between being on a line or a space, or a line or a space, or a line or a space, etc., etc. So if I actually write this in, line, space, line, space, line, space, line, space, line, space, line, forever. And we're going to talk about these funny little symbols shortly. Why does this matter? Because it's going to help us to actually read our music. For example, we might have something which looks like this. And because these notes are all on lines, if we imagine that our thumb is here, then this is the space, but the next note, which is this one, is on the next line that's up there, because we've jumped from line to space to line to space to line again. So, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. But if we start from here, this is the E, we jump to the next line, we jump to the next line, and then we'd say jump to the next space, which would be the next door neighbor, next line, next door neighbor, next space, line. But say then, for example, we wanted to jump down two notes that are going from a line, to another line, to another line, to another line, and then to another line to cover probably the most important note for us, middle C. But we will come back to that and why that is middle C shortly. So, once we have identified whether or not a note is on a line or a space, we've got a set of words that can help us with actually identifying what these notes are. So we're going to start off with all of the lines. These lines follow this pattern. Every good boy deserves football, which looks like this. Every good boy deserves football. And what's so important about this is that it helps us to recognize the starting note. So for example, if we go here, this note here is on the first line. I typically use my fingers to show this stuff because, you know, we have 5 fingers, there are 5 lines, it kind of helps us. So this bottom line is every good boy deserves football. Sorry, so the bottom line is every. And this means that this note being on the bottom line is an E, because that is the first letter of the word every. Notice, even though it's an E, it's not this E, or this E, or this E, or this E. It is this E. Because the thing that we have to know, not only does every good boy deserve football, or fruit, or favor, or fudge, or whatever people want beginning with F, we have to know that every, the E of every, is the E, which is 2 notes above middle C. So again, middle C, this the blue dotted note, the one that we typically start with, 2 black notes, we find it to the left, go C, D, E, and that's the every good boy deserves football. So if you are confused, then you just follow it. So for example, let's say I wanted this note here, okay? So first of all, I have to count the lines. This is the first line, the second line, the third line, the fourth line, the fifth line. Which one is this? It's on the first, second, third, fourth, fifth. It's on the fourth line. That goes every good boy deserves football. And on our piano, we can see every good boy deserves, okay? So it's not this D or this D or this D, it's the every good boy deserves D, okay? So this is kind of about how we read music. And then the spaces, even more simple. We don't even have a set of words. We just have one word, and that word is face. F-A-C-E. Again, we're thinking of the spaces between those lines, and we can use our fingers to represent this. F-A-C-E. Something which I'll just point out that I think I've definitely known some people to get confused by is the fact that when we've got things like every good boy deserves football and F-A-C-E, all this is doing is just doing all of the next door notes, just in sort of basically split into the lines and the spaces. So we have E on a line for every, and then F, the first letter of face, good, the second line, A, the second word of face, Then we got B, the third line. I mean, it's so easy to get these things confused. But all we're doing is just going up and going. Let's see if, in fact, let's do it this way. So every good boy, body, every good boy deserves football. And if I use the second verse to show this, because it'll be, in fact, I'll use the third because it should drop down a bit further. A, C, E. So all that's going on is we're going E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. And we're just looking and learning about how we can identify these things based upon if they're on a line or a space, just like that. So the last thing that we'll cover of the right hand is the most important note that we start off with. I'm going to keep this E here. In fact, there's two things I'm going to talk about. First of all, not that. First of all, even though we've just been using these black notes, this is the same for if it's a white note with a tail, or a white note without a tail, or a black note with a strange tail, or a black note with an even stranger set of tails. We only care about where this blob is, okay? Where the note head is. Here, this is also an E. This is still an E. This is also an E. An E, 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 E. It can have a dot. It can be anything else, but it's still an E. And that E is the E which is 2 notes up from middle C. We're going to do this in black notes just to make this life a little easier. So, we got our E, and we know that every single note is either on a line or a space. So what happens, because we've sorted out E, but what's going to be the case for the note that's one below that? And let's take a look. He says, come on. Cool. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So I've just played an E again. I'm just going to get that cursor away so it doesn't cause confusion. If we go down, because this was a line, we know this is going to be a space because all notes alternate lines and space. So line to space. And notice, interestingly, that we don't have, whenever we had, say, this line... let me start that again. Whenever we had this space, you see there's a line above and below it. This line, this space, we have lines above and below that. All this kind of good stuff. Oh, incidentally, just slightly off topic, it does not matter if the tail is going up or down. So don't let that be confusing. All that happens is that when we get to this note B, it swaps around. Okay, so the tails were going up when we're getting up to B, and then when we're above B, it just goes to downwards. And at a basic level, that is all we need to know. Okay, so, I mean, this is a really good representation. We're just going line, space, line, space, line, space all the time. Okay, so we've just done our line, and so the next note down is a space. Makes sense. We just have to be aware that it's the space below. So it's essentially here. If E is here, then that D is there. And so E going down to D. So what happens when we go down one from there? It's got to be on a line because we know that every note has to go line, space, line, space, line, space. But the problem is we don't have a line for it to go on. We've run out because it's sort of like, a line. This is a space. And there's got to be some kind of line here, but we've sort of fallen off. If we imagine we've got like a bunch of tracks or anything like that, we've actually fallen off. Alas, what we have to do is we're going to make up our own little line. And this is what happens here. So this little line here is essentially a fake line. It's called a ledger line. So it's C, and this is called a ledger line. Ledger. Okay? But we're going to ignore that for right now because we don't actually care. So what we have to be aware of is that this note is then C. And this one, not just any C, this is middle C. One of the most important notes for when we start off. And again, doesn't matter if it's a white note or, in fact, let's just move over here. Doopy-doopy-doop. It does not matter if it's a white note, which is just a circle, or if it's a white note with a tail, or a black note, or it's got any other amounts of complicated things. The note head, that blob, still stays the same, and it still tells us that that is C. And we know this is C, just to show once more, because if we imagine, if we know this is the E of every, thinking of our alphabet backwards, we're going down, so we're going downwards, which means we're going backwards through the alphabet. So we're going E, then D, the wrong thing. Oh yeah, sorry, my apologies. Then we're going to D, we go to C. So for example, if we're continuing to go down, so E, D, C, B, A, G, incidentally, because musicians only have time for 7 letters of the alphabet. So we only want A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, which is definitely 7 letters, and I definitely just checked that again to make sure. So if we're going down further from that, E, in fact, I'll play it. E, I will play 2 notes and they'll both be wrong. E, D, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C. And you see, all that's going on is that we're making more and more of these little lines. So all it's doing is it's following this pattern, and I'll just write these in for fun. B, I'll write it in properly. A, G, F, E, D, C, and all that good stuff. Luckily, we don't tend to care about these ones very much, but we definitely care about this one because this is middle C. Middle C. And occasionally, we will see B and stuff like that. In Piano Time 1, there is the tune She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain, and that starts with your thumb on a B, and we'll cover that later on. So, the main takeaways from here are that every note is either on a line or a space. If it's on a line, it's every good boy deserves football. If it's on a space, we use F-A-C-E. And remember, they're not just any F-A-C-Es, they're always, or every good boy, they're always the E that's 2 notes above middle C, as we've got written here, the E 2 notes above middle C. And so we look, every good boy deserves football. And for the spaces, we've got F-A-C-E, and that F is the F that is 3 notes, 3 notes above middle C. C, D, E, F. Remember, if we get stuck, as long as we know one note, as long as we know C, and as long as we know our alphabet quite well, then we can just work out any note. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Or backwards, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C. Anyway, we'll come to that. So for example, and just to quickly cover this, this is a little advanced, but this can be useful. So again, we're still talking about the right hand. These notes here, if we had to work this out, then we don't know what this is. And we have to actually use our brains and our incredible knowledge to do this. So what we do know, though, is that the top line is F, because every good boy deserves football. So I'm currently playing the note that is on this line. In fact, I'll do this down here. The note we're trying to find, I'll put it here so that we can kind of see the run-up. The note we're trying to find is this one. We know that this note is F because every good boy deserves football. So then we can think through our alphabet. So we know A, B, C, D, E, F. So that means that the next note, so if we're starting on F, the next note up is G. And notice that that means that it's the space above that top line. And then the next note up must be on a line. So that means this one is A. So just to write this out, just so we've seen, F, G, A. Again, we don't have H. We're musicians are simple folk. We don't particularly like to deal with more things than we need to, so we just stick with G. So we've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G, F, E, D, C, B, A. We just got to think through these things. And exactly the same. So, for example, any guesses of what this note might be? The one that's one up from A. The one that if it's A is on this magical line, this one is on the space above. This is, of course, B. Anyway, useful stuff for us to be aware of. Okay. So, what we have covered, if a note is on a line or a space, if it's on a line, we use every good boy deserves football. If it's on a space, it's going to be using the words F-A-C-E. If it's on one of these magical lines, these kind of ledger lines, I call them magical lines anyway. We count down, so we've got E is the bottom line, then it's D, then it's C to get to that middle C, okay? So, and that's what we've got for the right hand. Luckily, the left hand follows all the same rules, but the lines and the spaces have different names. So, everything we've just said about the right hand is absolutely true. It's still true, but we've got 2 slightly different things. Let's see if we can get them both on screen at the same time. Slightly tweaking. There we go. Fab. For the bass clef, so remember that's the low notes, that's the left hand. We've got grizzly, bears, don't fear anything. And this one starts from the G that is 1, 2 G's below middle C. So we find this because we find middle C, go down to the first G, go down to the second G. I'm just going to check if my camera can see that. Yeah, we can. Cool, we're fine. So, grizzly, bears, don't fear anything. Those are all of the lines. And again, notice that we're skipping out things. So this is line, a line, a line, a line, a line. If we did them all next door neighbor notes, it'd be line, space, line, space, line, space, line, space, etc., etc., etc. So we've got grizzly, bears, don't fear anything. And the spaces, again, this is going to be the A that's 2 A's below middle C. So we go to middle C, we find the first A, we find the second A, and we go, all cows eat grass. So we tend to think of our left hand as having the animals. It's got the grizzly bears and it's got the cows, okay? So our right hand has got like boys and faces, and our left hand has got bears and cows, okay? Like, I mean, that's why the left hand is just so awesome, okay? Because we've got bears and cows. What a great team. Okay, so we just have to remember that if we're trying to work out our notes for our left hand, the lines are grizzly, bears, don't fear anything, and the spaces are all cows eat grass. If we take a look here, this means that we can identify that this note is on a line. So we go, grizzly, bears, don't fear anything. You know, once we find that G, which is 2 G's from below middle C, grizzly, bears, don't fear anything. This one is grizzly, bears, don't. This one is on a space. So now we think all cows eat grass. Again, we're going from middle C, the A, the first A, the second A. All cows eat grass. This is eat, all cows eat. This is on a line, so it's going to go grizzly, bears, don't. Though, using our incredible brains, if we know that this note is all cows eat, we know that this note is just one down from there, because this is on a space and this is on a line, so they're next door neighbors. If we were here, all cows eat grass, and this would then be leapfrogging because we're going from a space to the next space down. And then this would go to the next line that's down, and then this is a much bigger jump. This is not only the next line, but it's the space below that. So this would be all the way down to A. And we know this is A because it's all cows eat grass. This note is very, very important to us, and we should know what this is called. This note is middle C. So the first note that we tend to learn is middle C. And again, notice we've got this magical line, and I'm just going to explain it down here. We are trying to find our good friend C, and we don't, that doesn't show up in Grizzly Bears Don't Fear Anything or All Cows Eat Grass. What we have to do, again using our incredible musical brains, is we have to know that the top line is A, because grizzly bears don't fear anything, and anything begins with an A. The spelling of that word annoyed me greatly when I was in year 2. I remember complaining of why doesn't any start with an N. But it starts with an A, because the English language is a beautiful thing. So we have A for any, which is here. We then have the next note up, which is on a space, B, and then the next note up, so we had A, B, and then C. And very, very importantly, this C is called middle C. And again, this is a very, very, very important thing for us to be aware of, that this one is middle C. Okay? Right. So, to conclude the question of which note is it, we have to know if it's on a line or a space. If it's the right hand, then we think every good boy deserves football for the lines, and FACE for the spaces. And if it is for the left hand, if it's a line, we think grizzly bears don't fear anything, and for the spaces, we think all cows eat grass. Okay? And the important things to remember are that for the right hand, it begins every good boy deserves football. It begins the E that is 2 notes above middle C. The spaces begin the F that's 3 notes above middle C. So C, 1, 2, 3, get to the F. That's FACE. And for the notes, if it's on a line, we have to go to the grizzly, which is the second G. So this is C, C, B, A, G. We then go to the next G, which is down there, and it goes grizzly bears don't fear anything. And the spaces, all cows eat grass. So, we have now covered which hand and which note, which only leaves which finger do we use, okay? And this also catches lots of people out. So, when we deal with this, of which finger, we have to think, well, we have to be aware of this simple rule. We take both of our hands and we just open them out, and we just remember that we go from the inside, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or if we close our hands, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Remember that for piano, our thumb is 1. And notice that it's both thumbs are 1, both little fingers are 5. And as long as you can remember 1 and 5, then that's the most important thing. Thumb is 1. This finger is called the index finger, and it's 2. This is the middle finger, and it's 3. This is the ring finger, and it's 4. This is the little finger, and it's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, for example, in this case, where we'd have both of our hands, we'd have both thumbs on middle C, then the second finger, then the third finger, then the fourth finger, and then the fifth finger. This is actually one of the warm-ups I tend to ask people to do, so it might be a little familiar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It obviously doesn't always have, we don't always have our thumb on middle C, but we do when it has the number 1 above it, or the number 2, or the number 3, or the number 4, or the number 5. Because we now know that 1 is, let's just try and do this, my apologies, is thumb. This is your index finger. This is your middle finger. This is your ring finger. And this is your little finger. So even if these words in the middle are a little confusing for us, especially like index and ring, we definitely know our thumbs, which are 1, and we definitely know our little fingers, which are 5, and then we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, what we'll see in bits of music, and we've got some examples here, is that we will have the notes, and then we will have a number above it. So, for example, A, let's run through our 3 questions. Which hand do we start with? And think about how we work that out. Which note do we start on? And then which finger do we use? In example A, because we're going to be using both of our hands eventually, we start off with our right hand. It's going to be, we know this because it's got this symbol at the beginning of it, this complicated symbol called a treble clef. This note we've learned is called middle C, and it is here. And I'm not going to play with my second, my third, my fourth, or my fifth finger. I'm going to play with my first finger because that is my thumb, and that is finger 1. And the number 1 above the note tells me what finger to use. Eventually, at the second bar, I'll be using my left hand. I know this because these notes belong to this staff here, the stave. And this symbol here means that we're going to be using our left hand. Again, we know the note. This is middle C. And the number below tells us what note we're going to be starting on, which is the thumb, which is finger 1. So, to take another example, example B, we start again with our right hand. We know this because this symbol is here. So we start with our right hand. Hello, right hand. We're then going to be starting on this note. We know that this note is E because every good boy deserves football, or every good boy deserves football, and E is the bottom line. And that is the note that we see here, E being on the bottom line. We also know that this E is the one that's 2 notes above middle C. And finally, the finger that we're going to use is finger 3, which is 1, 2, 3, our middle finger. So we're going to put our middle finger here. And it's going to be like this. So 3. And then we can see that these notes are just going up. So it's just going to sound like this. Okay, but most importantly is that we know that we start with our third finger. This note right here, third finger. Then we move on to our left hand. And we notice that this note is going to be on the left hand because it's got this symbol here. That this note, if we follow is going to be on a line, and we follow the fact that grizzly bears don't fear anything. So that's an A. We have to remember that when we're doing grizzly bears don't fear anything, we go grizzly bears don't fear anything. We start from the G, which is 2 G's below middle C. So middle C, down to a G, down to the next G. Grizzly bears don't fear anything. Obviously, we will start to learn where certain notes are, so you don't have to do this little process every single time. But when you're starting off, I think it's a really good idea. And we're going to take our left hand, going to go 3, and that's going to be our starting note. We know it's our third finger, our middle finger, because there is the number 3 there. And this will go 3, then this would go down a note. Notice that we're going from line to space, so it's going to go down to the next note. And this again goes from a space to a line, so there's just the next door neighbors. So this is 3, 4, 5, and my computer is complaining about that, but we're all going to survive. So example B, because we should really be having both of our hands in their starting places before we begin, sounds like this. Okay, and that's the kind of idea. And if I had a third hand, then I would show I'd actually highlight the notes, but I am unable at present due to my lack of a third hand. We've only got 2 more things to talk about, which are example C and example D. So, example C. Where do we put our hands? Have a little think about this. Maybe pause the video. Consider what we see in front of us. So, what are our 3 questions? Which hand are we going to use? Which note do we play? And then which finger do we use to play it? So, this symbol is for the right hand. It's called a treble clef. So we're going to use our right hand. Hello. The note here is E, which is the E that is above middle C. We know this because we remember every good boy deserves football. E is the first letter of the word every. And that E is 2 notes up from middle C. C, 1, 2, because C, D, E. And what finger do we use? We actually use finger 1 because it tells us to. So that means that we're going to put our hand like this. And just to kind of explain how we would play this thing, let me just try and do some jiggery pokery with my left hand. So this would go E, G, B. Notice we're actually going from line to line to line. And the way that we know that and the way that we are recognizing that is because there are no notes in the spaces. So this means that we're leapfrogging from a line to a space, leapfrogging over that space to get to the line. So we're going from line to line, then from line to line, which is what we see. So this first bar sounds like this. Okay. Meanwhile, this note here, we've got ourselves, grizzly bears don't fear anything. We've got to remember this is the A of anything. So we've got to think, where is this? So we find a middle C, we go down to the first G, we go down to the second G, because that's when we start counting. Grizzly bears don't fear anything. And we know that that top A is here. And this goes G, F, D. So anything, fear, don't. Okay, and the way we know this, again, because we're going from a line down to the next line, down to the next line. The fact that we started on our thumb, on our first finger, makes our life so much easier because the fingering is always there to help us, is always there to make sure that we can play the piece as easily as possible. And finally, example D. So this is a bit more of a complicated one. So we're going to think through this and then I'm going to talk through it. So there are 3 questions which we always have to ask ourselves. Which hand, which note, which finger? So, again, this is another example where we're starting with our right hand. We know this because we're going to use this symbol, the treble clef, and all these notes are on the same stave as this one. They belong to the treble clef. This note, is this on a line or a space? Ask yourself. This note is on a space. And if we are on a space, what's the set of words or what's the way that we remember that? We think F, A, C, E. And we have to think of the fact that we're starting on the F that is 3 notes above middle C. So C, D, E, F, F, A, C, E. This note here is on the first, second, third space, which is the third letter of the word face. F, A, C, F, A, C. So that means that this note here is C. Finally, what finger do we use to play that? We use our thumb. Because that is our first finger, we're going to use our thumb for that. And then from there, we can play this. C, D, E. Notice that these aren't C, D, E, or C, D, E, or anything like that. They're these C, D, E's up here. Again, because we have to make sure that it's not just any C, D, E, it's the C above middle C, because we've got an F, A, C to get there, okay? And then finally, we're going to talk about our left hand. Is this note on a line or a space? This note is on a line. And what we have to think of for this is, again, that this note is actually on the bottom line. So we've got to think grizzly, bears don't fear anything. Remember, these things always start from the lowest line and go upwards. So grizzly, bears don't fear anything. So this means that this one is on that lowest line. It's on the first line, and that is G. So we're thinking grizzly. Remember that grizzly isn't this G that's just below middle C. It's the second G that's down. So we're thinking grizzly, and then this note here. What's the... Well, actually, sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. We're trying to find where we start. So this is the note G. Then which finger are we going to use? Are we going to use our thumb, our second, our third, our fourth, or our fifth? We're going to use our fifth finger, which is our little finger, because there's the number 5 that's just below it. G, 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 and then we're going to know that this note is a C because all cows eat grass, okay? And it's that sort of thing that we can take our time making sure that we find it, because we think, okay, it's the set. It starts, the all cows eat grass starts from the second A below middle C, got middle C, 1A, second A, and we go all cows eat grass, and this one is this C. So this would go like this, and this entire bar would sound like this. G, G, A. So example D sounds like this. It's going to go C, D, E, and G, G, C. And that just about wraps up everything that I wanted to talk about. So the most important things about where to put our hands is that we have to ask ourselves, which hand are we going to be using? Which notes are we going to be playing? And how to recognize those notes? And then which finger are we going to be using? Like I said, I'm going to be making a PDF of this, which can be downloaded. And if anyone has any questions, please do ask, and I'll do my best to either reply directly or to make a follow-up video covering some of the ground which was less clear. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Have yourself a great day. Take care.